Welcome back to our podcast, everyone. Today we're diving deep into a topic that I think many of us can relate to: overthinking. Whether it's about making decisions, worrying about what others think, or replaying past situations over and over, overthinking can really take a toll on your mental health.
Thanks for having me again, Amira. Overthinking is something I think everyone experiences at some point in their life. It can feel like you're stuck in a mental loop, constantly analyzing and overanalyzing. It can be exhausting and, in some cases, even paralyzing.
So, Khurram, let's start at the basics. What exactly does overthinking mean, and why do we do it?
Overthinking is when you start to excessively dwell on thoughts or situations, often imagining different scenarios and outcomes. It's almost like your mind gets stuck in a loop, repeating the same thoughts over and over. It happens because our brains are wired to solve problems. But when we're uncertain or anxious, we try to control or predict everything, which leads to overthinking.
Amira, that makes sense. It sounds like our brains are trying to help, but they can get overwhelmed with too much.
Exactly. Overthinking is usually our brain's way of trying to prepare for all possible outcomes. But sometimes, it's more about control than actual preparation, and that's when it becomes harmful.
And the thing is, overthinking doesn't just affect our minds, it takes a toll on our emotions too, right?
Yes, it absolutely does. When we overthink, it often leads to feelings of anxiety, stress, and even depression. It's like your emotions get trapped in a cycle of negativity, which can make everything feel worse than it really is.
Over time, that kind of emotional buildup can really impact your mental well-being, can't it?
Definitely. And it's important to recognize that overthinking is often not based on reality. It's fueled by our fears, uncertainties, and past experiences, which makes it so powerful, and so dangerous if left unchecked.
So, Khurram, how can someone recognize when they're overthinking? What are the signs to look out for?
There are a few key signs. If you're constantly going over the same thoughts or decisions without resolution, that's a sign. If you feel overwhelmed or paralyzed when it comes to making decisions, or if you're second-guessing yourself all the time, it's likely that overthinking is at play. It's also common to feel drained or anxious from replaying past events or worrying about the future.
That's really helpful. I think a lot of people don't realize when they've entered that state of overthinking until it's too late.
Exactly. The key is to catch it early, when you first start to notice these signs. Once you're aware of it, it's easier to take action to break the cycle.
A lot of times, overthinking is tied to perfectionism.
Perfectionism can definitely fuel overthinking. When you feel like everything needs to be perfect, you constantly question and second-guess your decisions. It creates a fear of failure or making mistakes, so you overanalyze to try to avoid it. But perfectionism is unrealistic and often leads to feelings of inadequacy or frustration when things don't turn out exactly as you envisioned.
So, it's not just about wanting things to go well, it's the fear of failing that causes us to spiral into overthinking?
Exactly. The fear of failure makes you obsess over every detail, trying to predict every possible outcome. But in reality, failure is a part of life and learning. We need to accept that imperfection is normal.
Let's talk about some strategies to stop overthinking. What's one thing that could help someone break the cycle?
Mindfulness is a great place to start. Mindfulness helps you focus on the present moment, rather than dwelling on the past or worrying about the future. It's about noticing your thoughts without getting caught up in them. Simple practices like deep breathing, meditation, or even mindful walking can help ground you.
I love that. So, instead of trying to push the thoughts away, we acknowledge them but don't engage with them, right?
Exactly. The goal is not to fight the thoughts but to observe them and let them pass, rather than letting them control you.
Another thing that comes up a lot is the struggle with decision-making. Overthinking often arises when we can't make a decision. Do you have any tips for handling that?
Yes. One technique I recommend is setting a time limit for making decisions. If you give yourself, say, 10 or 15 minutes to think it over and then make a choice, it forces you to stop overanalyzing and take action. Setting a deadline reduces the mental pressure of trying to make the perfect decision.
That's a great tip. It's all about setting boundaries with your mind so it doesn't take over.
Exactly. The key is to trust yourself to make decisions with the information you have at the moment, rather than trying to predict every possible outcome.
What about challenging your thoughts? How can we use cognitive behavioral techniques to deal with overthinking?
One way to challenge your thoughts is to ask yourself whether the things you're worried about are truly likely to happen. Often, our fears are based on irrational thoughts, so by questioning them, we can gain perspective. Another useful exercise is to write down your thoughts and then look at them objectively to see if they make sense.
So, it's about questioning your own assumptions and beliefs?
Exactly. The more you challenge your thoughts, the more you realize that many of them are exaggerated or unfounded.
Sometimes, overthinking can lead to paralysis, where you can't make any decision at all. What's a good way to break that cycle?
The best way is to take action, even if it's a small step. When you make a decision or take a small action, it creates momentum. Action helps you shift out of that loop of indecision and anxiety.
So, just doing something, even if it's not perfect, helps you get unstuck?
Yes. Once you take action, your mind starts to shift from overthinking to problem solving.
Lastly, we've touched on self-compassion before, but I think it's really worth diving into. How can practicing self-compassion help with overthinking?
When you're overthinking, it's easy to be hard on yourself, especially if you feel like you're not making progress. But practicing self-compassion means being gentle with yourself. It's about recognizing that you're human, that mistakes are part of life, and that it's okay to not have all the answers.
So, self-compassion is a way to release the pressure we put on ourselves and stop the cycle of overthinking?
Exactly. The more you practice self-compassion, the less you'll feel the need to be perfect or have control over every situation. It creates a sense of inner peace and acceptance.
This has been such a helpful conversation, Khurram. To wrap up, what would be your number one tip for anyone who's struggling with overthinking?
My number one tip would be to start practicing mindfulness. It's a game changer in terms of managing overthinking. By staying present, you can reduce the mental clutter and find clarity in your thoughts.
I love that. It's about being present, not getting lost in the future or the past. Thank you so much for all the great advice today, Khurram.
Thank you for having me, Amira. I hope everyone listening takes these tips and starts applying them to their lives. You don't have to let overthinking control you.
And thank you to all our listeners for tuning in. We hope this episode helped you find a little more peace and clarity. Remember to subscribe, share, and keep taking care of your mental health. Until next time.
Take care, everyone. Keep breathing and stay mindful.